Welcome back. This is AP Environmental Science, Chapter 2. And today we're going to talk about environmental systems and really just give you probably a lot of information you already know from chemistry. And if you've taken physics, we're going to talk about basic chemistry. We're going to talk about basic chemistry or physics, such as the first law of thermodynamics and that sort of thing. This chapter, although you may want to just sort of skim over and not think about very much, you have to understand that chapter 2 is absolutely fundamental to our study in environmental science. You have to understand chemistry, you have to understand physics in order to understand environmental science and environmental systems. And so you have to understand the core nature of how matter and energy flow in a system and interact in a system, and just sort of their fundamental nature in the universe in order to understand Earth and some of the environmental problems that we have. And so make sure that you understand this chapter prior to moving on, and really focus in on some of the fundamental concepts here, because they carry out over to every single chapter. So this is a very important chapter. So here we go. So the first picture, this is actually a case study in your book on Mono Lake. And Mono Lake is a environmental system, a very important environmental system. And it's on right off the 395 on the eastern side of the Sierra Nevadas in California. And this lake system it's sort of a unique system because it's a terminal lake. And so water flows into it, but it doesn't flow out of it. And so what you get is a very high in salt condition, saltier than the ocean, in fact. And this system, there's many organisms that depend on this type of system, this salty system, including brine shrimp, different bacteria, and millions and millions of migratory birds every year. Every year, millions of birds migrate from the north down the Pacific Flyway to Central and South America. And so this is a stopping point for them. They feed and nest, and it's very important for them as they move on for further food resources in the south. And so they depend on this system quite a bit. However, in 1913, so the city of Los Angeles, the population was growing and they needed more water. And so they decided to take from two lake systems, Owens Lake system, which is nearby Mono Lake, and Mono Lake. And so first they started with Owens Lake, and they drained that lake completely. In fact, now it's just a unbelievably large dry lake bed because we pulled too much water too quickly from it. Now it's actually a source of dust and decreases the quality of air in the region, increasing asthma and other respiratory problems for people in that region. Once they dried Owens Lake, they moved on to Mono Lake and wanted to pull water from that lake. So they started to pull water from that lake and decrease the depth by half. And so really quickly they changed this environmental system. This really put stress on the system for birds and other organisms, and was problematic. Again, many organisms depend on this system. It wasn't until in the 1990s that they actually started to regulate how much water they pulled from this and try to get it back to its normal levels. And so now they've definitely made some ground in recovering Mono Lake, and migratory birds are now able to better thrive in this area. So really the point here is Mono Lake is an environmental system, and if you change one factor, so just the level of water, that has many unexpected effects throughout the system. So just the level of water change can really have a large effect. So Earth is a single interconnected system. Again, a change in one factor, any one factor, can have other and often unexpected effects. So an example I give you here is I forgot when, but I think early 1900s, maybe in the 1800s, I can't remember. South America and Chile and other countries, they brought in beavers. And so you have this cute little beaver here. And a beaver is an ecosystem engineer, which is good for many ecosystems, but bad for other ecosystems. And so in South America and Patagonia area, it was bad for ecosystems. Those ecosystems aren't made for beavers. And so what happened is just tons of detrimental degrading effects and stresses on Patagonian ecosystems and such. And so one factor, the beaver, can have large unexpected effects. So oftentimes we want to sort of define the system that we're looking at. And so different scientists are going to look at different systems. So it can be small, like a physiologist is going to look at a cod and its body systems. So here's a cod, and it's going to look at the body systems. And for instance, a physiologist is going to determine, well, why, how does it breathe? Why can it survive in really cold water? All sorts of things like that. Now, cod we'll talk about later in the year. In fisheries, cod was close to extinction at one time, northern cod. A marine biologist may look at the relationship between cod and herring, this predator-prey relationship between these species, and that forms a system, a little bit larger system, right? An oceanographer, this system may be the ocean, the currents that are in the ocean, and the fish populations in the ocean. So now you have a little bit larger level and system than you had prior. And then fishery manager, this may be interested in an even larger system, not only looking at the ocean and its fish populations, but also human activities and laws and such that are involved in this system. So small down to large systems, and different groups of people look at different systems. So a lot of these slides I'm going to go through real quick. I may not even say anything. You can pause it if you want to write down notes. You may even want to pause it and think about it for a while. I don't know, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You've taken chemistry, you've taken biology, maybe you've taken physics. If you want to spend more time, be sure to read your book, but I'd be happy also to sit with you and explain some of these concepts if you are having trouble remembering. So matter is absolutely important to understand. It's anything that occupies space and has mass. And so we're going to be talking about a lot about matter and how it flows through a system and such. Matter is a very important concept in environmental science. Mass is a measurement of the amount of matter an object contains. So weight and mass are not the same. Mass is how much matter does it have. Weight is the force that results from the action of gravity on mass. So if you go to the moon, you have the same mass, but you have a different weight because the force of gravity on you is much less. But if you go to Jupiter, and we're able to stand on Jupiter, which you can't, then your weight would be unbelievably higher. Your mass remains the same. Atoms, these are basic definitions. You just need to memorize them. Okay? If you don't know them, make sure to take a look at them. Understand what an atom is, what an element is. Periodic table, understand that this is going to describe all the known elements in the universe. I can spend a full course just on the periodic table, but I won't. That's for chemistry. Molecules, right? Containing more than one atom, so O2, N2. Compounds, molecules that contain more than one atom. So make sure you understand this. We will be talking about compounds. We will be talking about a lot about molecules, different types that pollutants and all sorts of things like this. Greenhouse gases like the ones you see here. Our atmospheric gases like those. Okay, atomic number, mass number, important to understand. Okay, know those definitions. Isotope, this is really important that you understand isotopes. We're going to deal a lot with isotopes. So know what that is. Remember, different number of neutrons and for their different mass numbers. And so we'll talk more and more about this. This is the structure of the atom, atomic theory. Right here's the nucleus with protons and neutrons, and then surrounded by electrons. We'll be talking a lot about electrons when we talk about electricity and power generation, and we'll talk about the nucleus when we talk about nuclear energy and that sort of thing, of course. Radioactivity is very important. So unstable isotopes are radioactive, right? And so when they decay, they release material from the nucleus. Okay, so radioactive isotopes decay, and then they release material from the nucleus. Different radioactive isotopes are more or less harmful. It just depends on what you're looking at. And so radioactive decay, depending on the element, they decay to different things. So in this case, when we look at like nuclear reaction and such, which we'll be spending time with, uranium-235 decays to thorium-231. And so we'll be talking a lot about this radioactive decay, because this is what we see in nuclear generation, nuclear power generation. And so uranium in this case is going to be called the parent, and thorium is going to be called the daughter isotope. Another sort of important tool to radioactivity is something known as the half-life. You should have gone over this in biology. This is very important for many different reasons. And so half-life is the time it takes for 1/2 of the original radioactive parent atoms to decay. So how long does it take uranium-238 to decay to thorium-231, right? And so how long does it take for half of it to decay to the daughter? And so let's see here. So when it undergoes decay, sometimes it emits harmful radiation, right? And that can be very bad for human health. And we'll talk about that in nuclear generation and other things as well. And so this knowledge of half-life is important, because if we can determine the length of time that a radioactive element may be dangerous, that is very, very important information. If we know that when uranium decays to thorium, if we know the length of time that it's dangerous, that it's radioactive, right, then we can determine how long we have to store that material. And that's very, very important. And so it turns out that uranium decays, its half-life is like tens of thousands of years. And so long-term storage is important. We can also determine the age of dead material, and so we can determine this by calculating basically carbon-14 levels in an organism decaying to nitrogen-14 and the proportions of carbon-14 in a dead biological material. This is called carbon dating. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but that is all I'll say about that right now. Chemical bonds, you should know these, covalent bonds, right? If we have methane right here, CH4 with these 4 hydrogens around it, this is sharing electrons. This is called a covalent bond. Ionic bonds, this is a transferring of electrons from one to another. Our classic one is table salt, sodium chloride, which you see here, sodium chloride, and what you see is a transfer of an electron. The electron from the sodium atom transfers to the chlorine atom. This causes them to become ions, and then we get an ionic bond forming. It's just an attraction between a positive and a negative. Hydrogen bonds are very important, and they're a weak chemical bond that forms when hydrogen atoms are covalently bond to one atom, and then they're attracted from another atom to another molecule, onto another molecule. So water is a classic example of hydrogen bonds, but we also can talk about DNA. And water is known as a polar molecule. So because of these hydrogen bonds, water becomes polar, a polar molecule, and one side is more positive and the other side is more negative. So I'm going to stop right here because we're running out of time for part 1. So this is the end of chapter 2, part 1. Sorry I rushed there right at the end. If you have questions, please let me know, and we'll move on to